that is our only housekeeping announcement that we have. Leslie Goddard is our most prolific lecturer. This is the 5th year of our series. Leslie has lectured with us every year, and we are just thrilled with her friendship and her expertise. So she, as many of you know, she is terrific at what she does. She is an actress, a historian. She received her PhD from Northwestern, so she's brilliant also. And without any further ado, I am pleased to welcome Leslie Goddard as Bette Davis. Bette is going to be speaking to us from New York City, and take it away.
What a dump. Whenever I do a stage show, I always start it this way. I come on stage, take a drag on a cigarette, and say, what a dump. It always breaks the ice. People can laugh and relax instead of having to revere me. You want some others? See if you remember this. Don't you just love Sunday afternoons? Everything quiet, nothing to disturb you? Well, I'd like to kiss you, but I just washed my hair. Or if you don't remember that one, perhaps you remember this. Nothing can hurt us now. What we have can't be destroyed. That's our victory over the dark. And it is a victory because we're not afraid anymore. Or if you don't remember any of those, perhaps you remember this. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. And that, you see, is what you call a legend. Apparently, I am a legend. Who knew? Although the first time someone called me that, I thought, but you only become that when you're dead. I know when you have a long career and you live a long time, people call you a legend. That, and if you have imitators. You know, people think I don't like the people who do imitations of me. Well, I do like it if they're good. Would you like to know how to do an imitation of me based on these imitators? The first thing you do is you take your cigarette and you puff like mad. And then you take your elbow and you move it like this. And then you say, Peter. If you really want to do it, you'll do it all together. Peter, bring me the letter. Do you know, there never was a picture or any part in which I ever played against a Peter. Never in any part, but it always goes, Peter, bring me the letter. You know, I never was even aware I moved my elbow like that until I saw someone doing me. But I was always aware I wanted to be an actress. When I was 11, I was at this wonderful New England boarding school. It was Christmas time, all wintry. Well, for some unknown reason, they decided that I should play Santa Claus, which of course was ridiculous because there was this enormous red suit, white cotton beard, ho, 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 all that, tree filled with burning candles. Well, they left me alone with the tree. So of course, I started poking around, you know, which presents are for me, when suddenly, whoosh, my cuff caught on fire. I shook my arm, but that made it worse. The suit caught it, my beard was on fire. A teacher came running in and rolled me up to put it out. But here's the thing. Once the fire was out, everyone gathered around. the sides of my face all red, eyebrows singed, eyes seared shut. And I heard someone say, "My God, she is blind. She is blind." I didn't know if I was blind or not, but I just ate it up. I remember thinking, this is my moment, my big moment. So I kept my eyes shut and groped around until I had squeezed out the full savor of that moment. That was my first real acting moment. And it just hit something deep inside. My face healed, thank God, thanks to my mother, Ruthie. Ruthie changed those dressings on my face every 2 hours for 2 weeks straight. That was Ruthie. Selfless, bless her heart. Well, she had a hard life, but she wanted me to have everything. It was Ruthie who convinced me I ought to be a dancer in high school and took me to New York when I got my first parts there. She even went with me to California when I got my very first screen test. That was an awful trip. Soon as I arrived in Los Angeles, it was, "Hello, is this Warner Brothers Studios? Yes, this is Bette Davis." Bette Davis, yes. Well, I've arrived here in Los Angeles, but there was no one from the studio to greet me. You said someone would be at the railroad station to greet me. They didn't see anyone who looked like an actress? Well, I was carrying a dog that should have told anyone I was an actress. It was not a good beginning. They didn't know what to do with someone who looked like me after all these years of really beautiful women in movies. Imagine when you're used to all of these beautiful, multi-feathered birds, and here I was, a little brown red. One time, they decided I was going to test some men for a part. Now, in those days, I was the yankiest, most modest little girl you've ever seen. But they laid me out on a couch and told me I was going to test 15 men. Each one was to come in, lie down on top of me, and give me a passionate kiss. I thought I was going to die. I just thought I was going to die. I said to my mother, "Ruthie, this is not working. We're going back to New York. You start packing. I'll get the telephone. I'll get it." Hello? Arliss? Arliss? Oh, this is Mr. George Arliss. Well, darling, how are you? You know, I meant to tell you, you might be a wonderful actor, but your nose looks exactly like the rear end of a horse. Oh, Mr. Arliss, I am so sorry. I didn't think it was you. I thought it was a friend having fun. A screen test? At Warner Brothers? Mr. Arliss, I will be right there. Mr. Arliss, you have resurrected me from the dead. George Arliss, if you don't remember, he was the most respected actor of his day. An Arliss film was a prestige film. That picture, The Man Who Played God, was a bang-up hit. Warner Brothers handed me a contract. I walked out of there in a haze. All right, Ruthie, I have to do something to look more sophisticated, older. Let me have one of your cigarettes. A cigarette, you see, can make up for other lacks. It's also a very useful prop, you know, to pause when you need to express a sense of anger. Bette Davis must have a cigarette, because without a cigarette, she cannot entirely be Bette Davis. Yeah, people are always warning me about lung cancer. I never listen. I once heard an imitator doing one of those imitations of me. He said, as me, "I've just returned from my doctor. He told me for every cigarette you smoke, you lose a minute of your life. I said to him, Doctor, what does that mean? He said, it means you died 2 years ago. And I'm still here. All right. Where was I? Oh, yes, cigarettes. Not at all acceptable for a girl growing up in Lowell, Massachusetts. Oh, such a Puritan upbringing. I remember one time saying to my grandmother, Granny, look, it's my very first white chiffon dress, and it's only my second school dance. Well, no, I don't think the neckline's too low. It comes an inch below the collarbone. Is that really too low? Now let's get the father thing over right away. Harlow Davis was stern, intellectual, a lawyer's lawyer. All my life, I've talked about the importance of my mother, and I brushed my father aside because, well, he brushed us aside. My father walked out on me and Ruthie and my little sister Bobby. He just didn't like children, especially not his own. Never mind that, Ruthie. We'll have ever so much more fun without him. We shall be the Three Musketeers, you and me and Bobby, all for one and one for all. Of course, after my father walked out on us, Ruthie really struggled. She learned photography. She moved us around. We lived in 75 different rooms and apartments in 18 years. To pay for my senior year in high school, Ruthie took all the photographs of the senior class. She did all the work, took the photographs, developed them, made the prints, working to the point of collapse. I shall never forget looking at her as I went up to get my diploma. Oh, she was so thin. She only weighed about 90 pounds. And those chemicals had given her rashes on her arms and her face. She was wearing this old hat, last year's dress, and this tired, proud smile on her face. One day, Ruthie, one day you will never work again. It was a terrific incentive. All my life, all my ambitions have been gathered together like fingers that make up a fist. You know, drive is considered aggression nowadays. I knew it as purpose. I took any theater job I could. Ushering, understudying, summer stock, small part in a good play on Broadway, and then the screen test and those awful few months in Hollywood. But by 1932, I was at Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was not MGM, not at all. Small budgets and low lighting. That was Warner Brothers. If you ever watch a Warner Brothers movie, notice how dark it is. That's so you can't see how little they spent on the set. In my day, Jack Warner was the God, the power, and the glory. Of course, even they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't even know what to call me. Well, I was born Ruth Elizabeth Davis, but my family always called me Betty with a Y at first. We changed it to an E when I was 13. It's from Balzac, you know, Cousin Bet. Of course, in Balzac, it's pronounced Bet. But my mother didn't know that. She saw the book and thought it was pronounced Betty. She was just wrong. But it didn't matter. The studio did not want me to be Betty or Bet. They wanted me to change both of my names. One of their god-awful concoctions was Bettina Dawes. I told them, under no circumstances am I going to go through life being nicknamed Between the Drawers. So my name really is my own. Unlike Miss Joan Crawford, You know her original name? Lucille LeSueur. Yeah, she got her stage name through a magazine contest. She is an artificial woman, start to finish. Of course, they wanted me to be just as artificial. For Fashions of 1934, they gave me platinum hair. Platinum! They just glamorized me beyond all recognition. I was the perfect imitation of Garbo. I looked absolutely ridiculous. You have to go your own way. And then the part, the script of human bondage, a marvelous part. Every actress should have been clamoring for it. So I went to see Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, the part of Mildred, no other actress in Hollywood will touch her. She's loud, she's vulgar, she is marvelous. You have to let me play her, Mr. Warner. Let me play Mildred. Let me play Mildred. Let me play Mildred. Finally, he snapped. Take it, he said, and go hang yourself. Well, I threw myself into that part. I spoke with a Cockney accent everywhere. Hello, loves. Would you like a cup of tea? Ruthie, where you going? Well, if you're not coming back until I stop, you'll have to wait a long time. I will sink or swim with Mildred. My co-star, Leslie Howard, at first just fed me his lines in a bored way. But when he saw I was stealing the movie, he woke up. You cad, you dirty swine. I never cared for you, not once. I was always making a fool of you. I hated you. Used to make me sick when I had to kiss you. I only did it because you begged me, you hounded me, and you drove me crazy. And when I'd let you kiss me, I used to wipe my mouth. Wipe my mouth. In fairness, I should have won an Oscar for that. But when have the Oscars ever been fair? I wasn't even nominated. People had to write me in. But what a part. Why did I always love to play these cruel, egotistical women? Because they are media from the standpoint of your craft. For my next role, in the movie Dangerous, I played an alcoholic actress. Fabulous part. Oh, I shouldn't laugh at you, should I? But I can't help it. You were so awkward at first, I almost laughed in your face. I thought you might at least be amusing, but you turned out to be dull and stupid and so afraid. Hurt me. You have the most amazing lack of humor of anyone I've ever met. Now that one did get me an Oscar. It was a consolation prize, I know, but still, an Oscar. Did you know I named it Oscar? I did. You see, the rear view of the statue is much more attractive than the front. It is. It's the cutest little Fanny you've ever seen. And in the early years of my first marriage to my husband, Harmon O. Nelson, he would not tell me what the O stood for until finally he admitted it was Oscar. And there just always seemed to me to be a certain similarity between the rear view of the statue and his. So I will always call it Oscar. And I still do, no matter what the Academy has to say. We had been high school sweethearts, and it should have worked, except he was making $100 a week as a musician. I was making $1,000 a week as a movie star. I'd come home from the studio all worn out from a day playing a Southern Belle or a Gangster's Mall, just ready to collapse. And I just wanted a tender, loving spouse. Well, there would be Ham sitting there with his pipe and his slippers, wanting the same thing. I suppose what I really needed was a good wife. Unfortunately, so did Ham. But I was focused on my career, and I knew I would never make it, never achieve my goals without good scripts and good directives. But in those days, you had to do any part that the studio gave you, no matter how ridiculous it was. In God's Country and the Woman, they wanted me to play a female lumberjack. Ham, the script they just sent me, it's just another Warner's gangster epic. My character has nothing to do, just another gangster's mall. I've got 5 years left on my Warner's contract, and it's going to kill me. I have done 20 films in 2 years, and all of them junk, just junk. It's going to ruin my career. So I'm leaving. I'll go to England. My contract doesn't say anything about not making pictures in England. There's a studio there would be glad to hire me. So I did. I went to Canada and then off to England. I'm delighted to be here, and I just hope that my British films are as good as my American films. Would you like to guess what happened? They suspended me. Jack Warner suspended me. Well, I thought, I'll just take him to court. I'll fight this to the end. My salary, Your Honor, yes, it is $1,000 a week, but that doesn't mean I should put up with anything. It's not about the money. It's about the work. It's about the chance to fulfill a dream. To be given work, to be given a dream that you can fulfill, that is the meat and potatoes of life. The money is just the gravy. Would you like to guess what happened? The ruling was not in my favor. Apparently, if someone makes more than $1,000 a week, she should put up with anything, including being forced to do parts that could ruin her career. Well, I lost that battle, but I won the war. When I got back to Hollywood, they gave me a good script and a good director. Marked Woman, based on the story of Lucky Luciano. A serious script about the New York underworld with a focus on society's losers. Some people end up with the short end, but not me, baby. I know exactly what I want, and I know how to get it. Now, in one scene in that picture, my character gets beaten up, off screen, of course. Well, the makeup they wanted me to wear. In those days in Hollywood, there was one look when you were injured. It was thin strip of gauze across the forehead and down under the chin. I looked like some sort of nun. So one day I went to my own doctor on the lunch break and I said, "Doctor, I want you to imagine I have been beaten up by several big thugs, bandage me up like I'd be." Well, he put thick gauze all around my head, pads in each nostril. I looked fabulous. When I got back to the studio, the gatekeeper called Mr. Warner and he said, "Mr. Warner, come quick. It's Miss Davis. There must have been a terrible accident." I really was one of the first fighters for that sort of thing. Because that's what Hollywood is about. Real reality of appearance. Hollywood always wanted me to glamorous, but I fought for reality. All right, Mr. Warner, what's next? Jezebel? A Southern belle who wears a red dress to an all-white ball? Sounds good. Who's directing it? William Wyler? Oh, I've heard that he's loud, demanding, ruthless. I'd love to work with him. Jezebel was the real beginning of that name above the title, because you really only are as good as your director. William Wyler was the first director who ever really directed me. Press, I can't believe it's you here. I've dreamt about it so often, a lifetime, really. No, longer than that. I put on this white dress for you, Press, to help me tell you how humbly I ask you to forgive me. Now, I had never done more than 1 or 2 takes of any scene in my career. In one moment, we had decided, William Wyler and I, that when Julie enters, she scoops up the hem of her riding habit with her crop. Well, I had practiced it. I thought I had it down, but we filmed it over and over again. Scoop up the hem, scoop up the hem, scoop up the hem. Finally, I said to him, would you just tell me what you want? Would you explain it, please? And he said to me, I'll know it when I see it. And he saw it all right on the 48th take. Ah. But then I asked if I could see the rushes. And then I understood that one take, very briefly, captured this devil-may-care expression. It was perfect. After that, I trusted him. After that, I knew what it was to have a real director. And after that, I got my second Oscar. So now I have 2, one for Dangerous and one for Jezebel. No, I don't use these as doorstops. I keep them shine. I call these my blood, sweat, and tears, because that's what they are. And I should have had more. You see, I'm an Aries. I never like to lose. For the private lives of Elizabeth and Essex, I shaved the top of my forehead, because that's what Queen Elizabeth I did. I broke Hollywood's first rule of Hollywood glamour. Always look your best, no matter what the part. The letter opens with my character pumping 6 bullets into the body of the man she loves. That broke Hollywood's second rule of movie stardom. Be accused of murder, but always be innocent. But the fans started to protest. I got letters saying, why can't you play someone nice for a change? Or, it was nice to meet you, Miss Davis, but my, you're so young. Apparently, everyone thought I was an old hag and something of a witch. All right, Mr. Warner, for my next picture, I do not want to kill anyone, and I'd like to play someone my own age. He gave me Dark Victory, story of a beautiful young socialite facing a fatal disease. Great picture. Why, Anne, there's a storm coming up. Look how dark it's getting. Oh, we'll have to bring our raincoats with us. It's going to rain cats and dogs, and it's going to ruin all of our nice bulbs. It's getting darker by the minute. Funny though, I can still feel the sun on my hands. Oh, Anne, I don't think I have ever been really satisfied with my work. But Dark Victory was the closest. I remember I asked for a screening of it before the movie premiered. So I sat alone in this little room and I watched it, and I could not get the smile off my face. I remember walking across the studio lot going sort of, you shouldn't be smiling, pleased with yourself in front of everyone. Really was one of the few times I ever was really satisfied with my work. That was in 1939. I made 4 pictures that year, each one a box office hit. Dark Victory, Juarez, Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, and The Old Maid. And when the United States entered the war, I wanted to help. I had lunch in the canteen one day with John Garfield. John, that's perfect. A serviceman's canteen in Hollywood, a Hollywood canteen. We'll find some old barn and fix it up as a nightclub. We'll get the tradesmen and the craftsmen to pitch in. If the unions will help, we could make a swell club for the boys. It was mammoth, the Hollywood canteen. It really was, but oh, so worth it. There's few things in my life that I've been really proud of, but the Hollywood canteen was one of them. And we had to have it because otherwise all those servicemen who came through Hollywood never got to see any movie stars at all. And of course, that's what they wanted to see, so that we provided. Even if I had to be on the phone all night, every night, begging for Spencer Tracy or Cary Grant or Katharine Hepburn to come down and serve coffee to the boys. I even starred in a few wartime pictures myself. In Thank You, Lucky Stars, I made the ultimate sacrifice for the war effort. I sang. When they first asked me to sing, I just roared with laughter for 2 days. But I did it. A never, never failure when you are in Australia or off among the Russians or out in the Aleutians. The battle is on, but the fortress will hold. They're either too young or too old. Not bad, huh? I'm glad I did it. Although it was very exhausting. Those were hard years. In the second year of the canteen, my second husband, Arthur Farnsworth, died. I was a widow at age 35. I had to work. But oh, the parts I got in those years, best of my career. Regina in The Little Foxes. You were such a soft, weak fool. The lies and excuses that I gave to you, and you believed them. That's when I began to despise you. I didn't think about it much. If I had, I guess I'd have known you'd die before me. But I never dreamed you would get heart disease so early and so bad. I'm lucky. I hope you die, Horace. I hope you die soon. I'll be waiting for you to die. Over the top, perhaps. But I think pictures should look as if we're working a little, which is a very old-fashioned idea nowadays. Nowadays, in pictures, you mustn't know anyone even knows the camera's on them at all. You see, it's just life. Well, we all have life 24 hours a day, and I think sometimes we want to forget life, huh? I think pictures should be big. I think characters should be big. I always fought to play parts the way I wanted to. Every once in a while, I would meet a director who was very aware I was a woman, and because of that, he must not let me have my own way. I have never let that discourage me. I would say to them, you are the director. You are not the one who appears up there on a screen, 40 feet wide and 30 feet high. The way I look, the way I sound is what people see. They don't know all these other people who worked on a picture. If I make a horse's rear end of myself up there on that screen, it is me. I, who is the 30 by 40 foot horse's rear end as far as the audience is concerned. Constitutionally, I can stand a good fight. I relish it. I like to fight. I have been told time and time again, I've got nerves of steel. In my business, until you're known as a monster, you're not a star. William Wyler said to me once, Betty, you know what your problem is? You do everything the hard way. And I said, yes. And when I die, I'm going to put that on my tombstone. She did it the hard way. Yeah. By the late 40s, my streak seemed to be over. Beyond the Forest in 1949, now that was a terrible picture, terrible. Well, I was too old for the part. And then the husband, he's supposed to be fat and grotesque, an absolute monster. And who did they cast? Joseph Cotton. So attractive. Why would any woman want to get away from him? So I went to Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, this is my last appeal. Take me off this picture. If I am still having to argue after 18 years about an unsuitable property, I'm leaving. You want this picture finished? I get my release the day after we wrap. Well, you can imagine. Would have been nice and easy to stay, but that was never for me being nice and easy. And I got my release. And the very last thing I ever had to do at Warner Brothers, I had to dub one line for Beyond the Forest. And the line I had to do was, if I don't get out of here, I'll die. If I don't get out of here, I hope I'll die. Well, the sound crew, everyone just exploded in laughter. It really was the perfect line to leave on. Leaving Warner's was hard because the studios really were like your family in those days. And the studios would say, but we gave you your initial chance. You really have no right now to grow up and start making demands. But I had grown up, just like we are with our own children when they grew up and have to leave mother and father. So I had to go. Well, Ruthie, that's it. I'm alone. I'm divorced. Divorced from Warner Brothers, and now divorcing Sherry. Third husband, third marriage over. I'm alone. At the age of 42 and with a 2-year-old daughter. Out of all these awful marriages of mine, the one good thing was my daughter, beautiful BD. Well, BD and I will just retire together. And then, at this low point in my personal and professional life, it arrived. A script, the script, all about Eve. Mr. Mankiewicz, I read this script you sent me, this All About Eve. It is marvelous. I haven't been so excited about a part since Of Human Bondage. Of course, I'm very sorry Claudette Colbert broke her back and had to pull out on you, but still, I'm thrilled. I do not exaggerate when I say it was the greatest break I ever got in my career. Mr. Mankiewicz taught me the key to Margot Channing's character, this aging actress. He said to me, Margot Channing is a woman who treats a mink like a poncho. Margot Channing is not a witch. She is an actress who is getting older and is not very happy about it. And why should she be? People get older, their bodies decay, they get sick, they forget things. What's good about any of that? My favorite bit in All About Eve is when Margot is stuck in the car, knowing that Eve is going on stage for her. Funny business, a woman's career. The things you drop on your way up the ladder so you can move more quickly. You forget you'll need them when you go back to being a woman. One career all females have in common, whether they like it or not, being a woman. And in the end, nothing's any good unless you can look up just before dinner or turn around in bed, and there he is. Without that, you're not a woman. You're just someone with a French provincial office and a book full of clippings, but you're not a woman. Slow curtain, the end. Oh, and making that picture was so much fun. You know, we were supposed to be at each other's throats. You could cut the atmosphere with a knife. It wasn't like that at all. And on top of everything else, I fell madly in love with Gary Merrill, who played Margot Channing's director, Bill Sampson. So on top of everything else, love was in bloom. Gary, let's do it. Let's just run off to Mexico and get married. Mexico in July. Why not? We can adopt children, a boy for you, a girl for me, a family for BD. Yeah, I loved being a wife. Never married anyone I didn't think I was in love with. But funny thing happened. He married Margot Channing, not Bette Davis. And I married Bill Sampson, not Gary Merrill. After 10 years, almost to the day, this fourth marriage of mine collapsed. Gary was a macho man, but none of my husbands have ever been man enough to be Mr. Bette Davis. Strong women only marry weak men. Love, marriage, they should be a part of a woman's life. And that, in the end, I did not have. And I would have liked it, believe me. After Eve, there should have been happiness all around, but no, those were the dark days. Illness, injuries, my acting career dried up. Ruthie died. God, I miss her every day. But I am not planning to retire. Even now I'm reading scripts. Relax. I relax when I work. It's my life. I will not retire as long as I've got my legs and my makeup kit, which is why I'm considering this one script now. A low budget, high risk movie for a salary far below scale. It's about a former child star living with her sister who's in a wheelchair. It's called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I will play Jane and Joan Crawford will play whatever. I'm going to have to sing in it, so I've been practicing. See what you think. I've written a letter to Daddy. His address is heaven above. I've written, dear Daddy, a letter saying I love you. think I'll do it. Even though Joan Crawford and I have never been good friends. We are not simpatico. I admire her, but to me, Joan Crawford is the embodiment of the movie star. I've always felt her biggest appearance has been Crawford being Crawford. But if working with Joan Crawford is what I have to do, I will work with Joan Crawford. If the public wants me to be a gargoyle, I will be a gargoyle. This is what being a movie star means. The key to a long movie star career is always finding the next thing, the newest thing to keep audiences involved. Sometimes there'll be a part and I'll think, oh, if I were 20 or 30 years old again, would I love that part? No. If I could do anything, I'd go back. Give me the good old days of Hollywood, the days of heroes and villains, the movies were the stars in those days. Because really, the movie stars are the only real royalty Americans have ever had to look up to and dream about, to go to the movies and cheer and hiss. I think movies should be bigger than life. I think the actors should be bigger than life. The script should be bigger than life. The whole thing should be bigger than life. Boy, it was a glorious time, those old Hollywood days. Lives were made better because of Hollywood in those days. And it is totally incredible to me that this shy little Yankee girl from Boston got to be a part of those days, the greatest days the movies will ever know. Well, slow curtain, the end. All right, but don't go anywhere, because what I want to do is open it up at this point for questions that came to mind, right?
Hey, Leslie, that was wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
I can read you the questions if you'd like.
Oh, yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question Joanne is asking was the feud between you and Joan Crawford, fact or fiction?
Yes. Fact and fiction. Here's what I'll do. I wish I had like a hat or something to take off, but I don't. So I'll tell you, I'll go back to being Leslie Goddard because that's the easiest way to answer that question. There really was a genuine feud between the two, partly because of the fact that they were the two leading actresses at the time. And they were competing for a lot of the same roles, especially after Joan Crawford left MGM and came to Warner Brothers. And they did often literally compete for the same part. For example, Bette Davis was at one point approached for the lead role in this movie called Mildred Pierce. She did turn it down, but of course, when Joan Crawford won an Oscar for that, that was upsetting, as well it might be. When they got together on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, there was a palpable sense of enormous dislike between the two of them, but they were professional about it. I think they both knew how important that movie was going to be to their career. There's always these rumors that, that one time Joan Crawford put weights around herself because there's a scene where Betty had to pull Joan Crawford off the bed and Joan Crawford wanted to make that difficult. Who knows? That might be true. That might be fiction. But the reality is they were professional on the stage at the same, on screen when they were filming, at the same time that it had to have been tough when you're fighting for the few parts that are available for an older actress. So
did they ever compete for the same men?
They did, yes, at one point. And you know what? I'd have to go back and get the details on it. It was one of Joan Crawford's husbands. And there was this, rumor about Bette having an affair with him. Maybe true or not. The difficulty with Hollywood in those days is that so much was controlled by the studios. And the studios were really good at covering up scandals in any point. So yes, there were indications of that, but we probably don't know as much as we could because so much of it was so successfully covered up. There's a lot about Bette's life that might or not be true. For example, her husband, Arthur Farnsworth, very sadly, he was walking down a street and literally fell and passed away. Turned out he'd had a bad fall 2 weeks before, and there seemed to have been some
cognitive issues.
Yeah, exactly. And he passed away. This was always covered up. Bette always said nothing had ever happened, but then there were signs of a fight between them. And we probably will never really know exactly what happened. But it was a good example of how good the Hollywood studios were at covering up these bad things that happened to people on their I was about
on
to
their
say
payroll.
on their payroll. Yeah.
Okay. Did when you were talking about her fourth husband, you mentioned that let's run away and adopt children. Did they adopt children?
They did. They adopted two children, Margot and Michael. Very sadly, it was discovered that Margot had brain damage at some point when she was very young, probably soon after she was born. And she had to be ultimately institutionalized, and Gary Merrill really took care of her. Michael grew up in the family, and he's still around. He's been working very closely with Catherine Cermak, who was Bette's, really her personal assistant, but really her confidant, her best friend in the last few years of Bette's life. Michael Merrill and Catherine Cermak have really been working hard to kind of keep Bette's legacy alive, to work with, things like awards in Bette Davis's name. BD and Bette had a large falling out. A lot of it centered around the fact that BD wrote a book about Bette called My Mother's Keeper, which it wasn't quite as scandalous as Joan Crawford's, the book by Christina Crawford, but it was enough to deeply, deeply hurt Bette's feelings. And in fact, Bette wound up writing BD out of her will. They never really spoke again. It was a really tragic kind of a falling out.
That is tragic. Is BD still alive?
She is. She's still alive. She became a born again Christian, and she runs her own sort of ministry out on a farm. She married when she was very young. She was 16 years old when she married. She had to get her mother's permission to marry. And she's still around. I've met some people who know BD, and they say she's actually really a lovely person. It's a sad thing because we know today, right, how hard it is for anyone growing up in a Hollywood family. And she was growing up right at the time that Bette and Gary Merrill were married, and they had a very fiery marriage. There were, whether to what extent we can believe the stories of, alcoholic fights and maybe even domestic abuse. We can measure, or we can attempt to measure how true or false those are. But regardless of the extent of them, there's no denying it was a very, very fiery relationship. And I think BD really got caught in the middle of all that.
Is BD in touch with her adopted brother?
No, actually, when My Mother's Keeper came out, Michael Merrill also cut off all contact with BD. It's really, really sad.
Yeah, and because apparently she was very close with her mother.
She was. Her mother was utterly devoted to Bette, to the point that her sister Bobby really got overlooked. Everything went into Bette and Bette's career, and Bette, to her credit, was enormously appreciative of that, even though her mother got little caught up in the whole thing. Someone was interviewed about Bette Davis and said, if Betty got a fur coat, then Ruthie had to have an even more expensive fur coat. If Betty got a new car, Ruthie had to have a bigger new car. So, Ruthie kind of rode that, but there's no denying that she really did deeply support Betty at a time when the family was really struggling. Ruthie was really struggling. So you do give Betty credit for that. Yeah.
Did Betty take care of her sister?
She did. Although again, Betty was almost constitutionally incapable of having a close family relationship. She seemed to be almost looking for fights in a way. She could be enormously cruel to Bobby, although she supported Bobby for a long time. She would do things like, for example, when Bobby got married, her husband was struggling with alcoholism, and Betty gave them like a case of liquor as a wedding present, and just things that are really not kind to do to the other person. There's a biography of Bette Davis that's called Dark Victory by Ed Seekoff. And he chose Dark Victory in part because it was Betty's favorite role, but also he said it's the perfect encapsulation of Bette Davis's life. In many ways, this was an enormous victory. She was one of the most accomplished actresses. She was enormously influential in terms of seeking out roles that were outside the norm, that let her really act as opposed to look glamorous. At the same time, she never seemed able to find really deep happiness in her life. And at one point, I think she was talking to, I think it was Jane Fonda, because she, starred with Henry Fonda in, especially most particularly in Jezebel. And she was talking to Jane Fonda, and she said something like, "I don't think any actor is able to have a private family life." And Jane Fonda said, "My first thought was, I do know some actors who have really happy personal lives." But for Betty, it was almost like she was uncomfortable having a happy, contented relationship with people really close to her. So Dark Victory, in a lot of ways, is really a perfect title for a book about her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. What was your favorite role?
She always said it was Dark Victory. And I think that's true, because I think that was the role that was the first one to capture what made Bette Davis so powerful, because it's a role where it's romantic melodrama is what she really did best. And you look at her whole career, I mean, this is a career that's like 50 years. I think when you look at the full list of movies that she starred in, it's like more than 100 movies. It's an enormous body of work. She did comedies, she did tragedies. Late in her career, she was always doing these kind of, crazy Gothic thrillers. But the ones where she was really at her peak was those late 30s, early 1940s romantic melodramas where she just shone. And Dark Victory was probably the first of them. Now, when you talk to people about what, fans of hers, about what do they think were her greatest roles, the ones that tend to come up most often would be things like Now Voyager, which is a dynamic work, The Letter. People tend to love Mr. Skeffington, and of course, All About Eve. Yeah. I mean, if I was going to say, when people ask me to recommend a good Bette Davis movie to watch, I think All About Eve captures Betty at her absolute best. And what's amazing about All About Eve, if you look at the trajectory of her career, she was at the height of her fame during World War II. And then it kind of went into decline. And by Beyond the Forest in 1949, people thought she was all washed up. And then she comes roaring back with All About Eve. And then again goes into decline. And people think, well, now she's really over. And then she comes back with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. she had this ability to reinvent herself that is really remarkable. Especially in a field where, typically once you start playing mothers, your career just goes into a decline. So All About Eve is the one that I think hits her at the peak of her powers.
Any contemporary actress today that
Ah,
she reminds you of?
not as a whole, but a lot of that is because of the nature of Hollywood. I mean, it is true that movies in the 30s and 40s were a lot more over the top than we would expect today. They were a lot more influenced by theater. Betty, even actually, the reason Betty got a screen test is because she'd been working on Broadway, and talkies had just arrived in Hollywood, and they needed actors with familiarity with speaking, and she had that. And her style, which was that dry, brittle voice and that kind of chewing the scenery type, we don't tend to look for that in actors. Boy, if I had to guess one, I think of someone like oh my God, here I go. The Broadway actress who was in Evita. What is her name? Patti LuPone. I might think of someone like Patti LuPone on stage, who's known for these big, powerful, dramatic roles, and who isn't afraid to take on challenging, different kinds of parts. That might be the closest, I would say.
That's an interesting choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
She also has a very happy home life.
Yeah, she does, right? There you go. The opposite.
Okay. Felicia would like to know what you want but did not get, and why didn't you get it?
What part? What role? Sorry, there was a blip there.
Yeah.
It's interesting. A couple of them, and one of them, believe it or not, was the African Queen. And Betty was offered the role that ultimately went to Katharine Hepburn in The African Queen. She turned it down because it was going to be filmed on location, and she wanted to be able to come home at night. She said if they could just move the African rainforest or wherever it was being filmed to Los Angeles, then she would have done it. And I think it was hard for her because, partly because of Katharine Hepburn coming in and being such a dynamic performer. It's interesting. She never resented Katharine Hepburn's success in the same way that she seems to have kind of resented Joan Crawford's success. But I think it's because Katharine Hepburn was more in that mold of wanting to be an actress. But here's what I always find interesting. Do a quick tangent. The American Film Institute did a list of the 50 greatest actors and actresses from classic Hollywood. On the list of actresses, Bette Davis came in at number 2. Number 1 was Katharine Hepburn. And what I find interesting about that is when I think about The African Queen, I could see Bette Davis in that role. I think it would have been a different movie than The African Queen with Katharine Hepburn, but I think it could have been a really good movie. In other words, I can see Bette Davis in some of Katharine Hepburn's greatest parts. I have a lot more difficulty seeing Katharine Hepburn in some of Bette Davis's great parts. I can't put Katharine Hepburn into Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And I love Katharine Hepburn. I think she's an outstanding actress. But I think Katharine Hepburn had a great depth to her, but not as much breadth as Bette Davis had. Bette Davis, I think, had this phenomenal breadth to the types of roles that she went into. So anyway, The African Queen is probably the one that comes most to mind.
That's so interesting. And did any of I'm trying to remember any of Katharine Hepburn's roles that relied on extensive like makeup or changing how she looked, because she had a very patrician.
She did,
look.
And she tended to play that patrician type of
like
role very well. Mm-hmm.
The Philadelphia Story, that was perfect.
Absolutely, that's a perfect example. Yeah.
Whereas Bette Davis did not have that look to fall back on.
Right.
and which freed her up to do other things.
It absolutely did. It absolutely did. Someone in later years, when Betty made the round of talk shows, and she was really marvelous on talk shows because she would talk about anything and she was consistently funny and self-deprecating. And someone asked her one time if she'd ever had any facial surgery. And she said, if I was going to have work done on my face, would I have chosen this face? And she said, when I was young, I thought I was, so unattractive. And now I look at myself and I think, my God, I was so beautiful in those days. She was really, really funny. And that was a good example. But you're right. I think it really did free her up to take on more different, more challenging parts. I mean, she was playing Queen Elizabeth I, in the character in her 60s when she was still, I think she was in her early 30s at the point. I mean, it was just amazing what she would take on. She was never afraid to go out on a limb.
And that probably is a credit to Ruthie for giving her such tremendous self-confidence.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for all that, Ruthie did give Bette Davis, probably assisted in Bette Davis's enormous ego. At the same time, that confidence was part of what made her such a powerful actress. Yeah.
And helped her survive what.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did she ever call her mother or her mom?
She might have when she was young, but typically whenever she referred to her mother, it was always Ruthie. And I'm trying to remember if I've ever heard an explanation from Betty herself about it. I think it was more because they were, more like the Three Musketeers, Ruthie and Bobby and Betty growing up. But it is true that they were more than mother and daughter in the sense that they supported each other financially, emotionally, in every way possible, even once Betty was older. And it was both a wonderful thing and a drawback, as you would probably expect.
Sure. Who was your favorite male actor or favorite leading man?
He always said Claude Rains, and I thought that was a terrific choice because Claude Rains was one of the great actors of Hollywood, but he didn't necessarily have classic leading man looks, which means he got some tremendous roles. One of the greatest scenes, I think, in any Bette Davis movie is there's a scene in the movie Deception where they're out to dinner. It's Bette Davis's character and Bette Davis's fiance and Claude Rains. And Claude Rains is ordering dinner. And it's this tour de force performance by Claude Rains. He's trying to procrastinate on what they're doing and therefore create problems. But it's this fascinating scene. And you can see, I think, Claude Rains' range there. And it's right. Researching Bette Davis's life actually gave me a better appreciation for Claude Rains. He's now one of my favorite classic Hollywood actors, but underappreciated.
Great. We have lots and lots of compliments, which I'll send to you.
I'll answer more shortly. Sorry.
No, please. Susan would like to know, did Betty and Ann Baxter have any problems on All About Eve?
They did not. They were actually very, very good friends and remained good friends afterwards, which is surprising, right? Because their characters were at each other's throats. Betty respected the fact that Anne was willing to put up a good fight. Betty always respected that.
Okay. Evan would like to know, did she have any interaction with Barbara Stanwyck?
Boy, that is a good question. She must have, but not that I'm recalling. The one way that I can think of it is that when Betty moved heavily into television, late 60s and into the 70s, in part, it was her searching for a role on television that would be as successful for her as Barbara Stanwyck's work had been on television. Because Barbara Stanwyck had this great career on television where she was a very respected sort of, matriarch kind of a character. Betty very much wanted that herself, although she never really found it. She did television movies and standing in for Perry Mason sometimes, but never really found that one deep part.
Okay. Lorelai asked, did Betty coin the phrase "getting older isn't for sissies"?
I don't know if she coined it, but she absolutely had a needle-pointed pillow in her house when she was older that absolutely said that. So yeah, she's very much associated with it.
Okay. Don asked, what is inscribed on her tombstone?
It says she did it the hard way. She's buried with Ruthie and Bobby. It just says Davis, and Betty's name is in biggest letters at the bottom.
Gail asked, did she have a relationship with grandchildren?
Yes, she did. She did. And she said actually at one point, and this is a cute thing, she was raised in one of her grandson's eyes because of the fact that she was in, do you remember that song from 1981? She's got Bette Davis eyes. One of her grandsons said he thought that was really cool. And she was very,
it is really cool,
isn't it? I know. The problem, of course, was she had that falling out with BD. And I believe, again, I'd have to go back and look it up. I don't know about Michael Merrill, and I don't know about his children, or if he even had grandchildren. Bette Davis passed away in 1989 at the age of 81. She was suffering from breast cancer. She'd had a mastectomy, and very sadly, it came back. So she passed away. I mean, she was 81, which it's really not that old, although she'd been a very heavy smoker and a heavy drinker for quite a while.
And the daughter that was institutionalized, is she still alive?
I believe she has passed away. I'd have to check on it.
That's a really sad story. Once she became successful, did her father try to come back into her life?
Not really, no. I think even if he had, I don't think Betty would have wanted anything to do with him. I think he made some overtures, but I don't think he got anywhere with it. What he had done to Ruthie had such an impact on Betty. It was just one of those things that, at least to Betty, was pretty unforgivable. It was. I mean, it was hard. If you're talking about growing up in the teens, but that was hard.
They kept his last name.
Yes, they did. And for whatever reason, I mean, partly because there was a stigma in those times about divorce, and really, she did become a movie star at a fairly early age. One funny bit about the name, about Betty with an E at the end. Bette Midler was actually named in part because of Bette Davis, but they pronounced it Bet. And it turns out, without realizing, that Bette Davis's spelling was actually a mispronunciation of what should have been Bet. So Bette Midler does have the quote unquote correct pronunciation. That's unrelated to Davis, but fun trivia.
Okay. Was Betty a happy person after her Hollywood days wrapped up?
I don't know if I would say Bette Davis was ever a happy person ever. She said her happiest days were early in her career, especially when she was working with William Wyler. She adored William Wyler, working on things like Jezebel. The fallout of her career ending, the fallout with her daughter, it was, and the ending of her marriages, 4 marriages all ended. What was psychologically very tough on her. And she did, I think, in her last couple of years, find a lot of contentment, if not happiness, in the fact that she was being recognized for her achievements, that she was getting awards and reviews of her film work, and people wanted to see her on talk shows. And I think there was a certain satisfaction in that, but I don't know if I would say I see happiness in those last years.
Did she have any actress friends?
She did. And Olivia de Havilland actually was among them, partly because Olivia de Havilland took Warner Brothers Studios to court in 1943 and won in a case similar to Betty's.
Why did Olivia's case?
Who knows? Who knows? Probably because by this point, but that was in 43. By that point, it was becoming more and more apparent that the studio system was terribly unfair to the actors. I mean, not having any say. Well, they did have some say, but really not being able to choose your own parts and being in many ways forced to do roles that could be bad for your career. And then if you protested, then being put on suspension and having that time added to the end of your contract. I mean, it was a really awful situation that was starting to dissolve by the mid 40s.
And how long was she tied to Warner Brothers?
18 years altogether.
Wow.
It was really not until 1949 that she got her quote unquote freedom. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how many Oscars did she win?
She won 2 Oscars. She was nominated 10 times. I believe she was the first person to be nominated 10 times. But after the 2 Oscars for Dangerous and Jezebel, she never again won an Oscar. Now that has been passed ever since. If you look at especially Meryl Streep, I know Laurence Olivier tied her for the number of Oscars, but she was the first one to get 10. And she was, I mean, in the early 40s, she was being nominated I think she went 5 years where she was nominated for Best Actress every single year. I mean, consecutively. It was just crazy.
And was she bitter about not winning?
Oh, yes, she was. She said at one point, I should have had more. And in a lot of ways she should. I mean, the fact that she didn't win Best Actress Oscar for All About Eve, or how about Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which is such a tour de force.
Which actresses won those years? Do you recall?
No, but there's a great story about Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, because when she was nominated and Joan Crawford wasn't, Joan Crawford called up all the other nominees and said, if you can't make it to the ceremony, I'd be happy to accept on your behalf. And it was, I think it was Anne Bancroft. I want to say Miracle Worker, something like that. Yeah. But, so much of the Oscars, right, is about, personality and relationships. And I think Betty really did have an ability to push people away, and that probably did impact her chances for winning or not, which is sad, right?
Absolutely. She was unique.
She really was.
We have a couple more. Okay. This is from an anonymous attendee. This person says, in her older years, I saw a TV interview with Betty, who was dressed in black and said she hung a black wreath on her door because her Hollywood friends had stopped calling.
Yes, she did. And she had a birthday party once. What was it? It might have been her 70th birthday, where she dressed everything like it was a funeral. Yeah.
Diane shares this story. I have a small vignette of having been on vacation with my parents in the early 40s. It was at a private resort in Arizona, and Betty was there with her mother. They were having the most wonderful time, dressed in fun, casual Western clothes and dancing all the Western dances. Her mother especially loved Put Your Little Foot.
Huh. So. Wow, what a great little story. I love things like that. Something wonderful about remembering that even the biggest Hollywood stars are people, right? They're
absolutely. And I have the impression she lived her entire career in the California area.
She actually had homes on the East Coast. She always said she was a New England girl at heart. And she and Gary Merrill had this great place in Maine, and they called it Which Way, Witch way. She really did always cling to those New England core. I think it was a really big part of who she was. So she usually did. In later years, she actually moved to be closer to her grandkids before the falling out with BD. But really, in the end, it was California. And I always feel like it's a great thing that she found Catherine Cermak. Catherine Cermak really was an enormous, I don't want to say stand-in daughter, but gave someone by Betty's side to be a friend at the end. And that's so, don't we all need that?
Absolutely. Avis just added Sophia Loren won Best Actress Award in 1962 for Two Women.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Very good.
Sophia Loren is no slouch. So
no slouch. If you're going to lose, why not?
Right.
Pretty good.
Leslie, thank you so much. One last question. Sue wants to know, did she get along with Lillian Gish in Whales of August?
She did. And for those of you, if you're not familiar, Whales of August was her last big feature film. That was 1987. By all accounts, yes, they did. I don't mean to say I think they were ever tremendously close, but they really did. In that movie, I mean, what a brilliant sort of conclusion. If you're going to end an enormous movie star career, boy, that's a great movie to end it with. Betty had a stroke, a series of strokes by that point, and you can see part of her face is kind of frozen. But the relationship between the two of them was really touching. And I think they both knew that this was a good thing for their careers at that point, and a nice way to create a legacy. So yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So.
Leslie, thank you so much. This was just so much fun. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah.
We'll invite you back again soon. I wish you all the best. Stay safe.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for being here. Thanks for spending the afternoon together. It's
over 600 people signed up to watch.
Amazing.
So it is amazing.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great rest of the day, and we will talk soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Symphony. We will speak to you soon. Bye-bye.